Hey, in this series, we're going to talk about the top 5 reasons why the single plane swing is easier than your conventional golf swing. So there's no better feeling knowing that when you wake up in the morning to go play golf, so that you're going to play well. There's no better feeling of hitting good golf shots down the fairway. Years ago, I was frustrated because I lost that. I was confused, I was frustrated, and then I met Mo Norman and learned the single plane swing. And so now I wake up every day and I know I'm going to hit it well, I know I'm going to play well, I know I'm going to have fun. So my mission today is to help as many people as possible wake up every day feeling good that they're going to go out there and play great because of the single plane swing. Hey, welcome to the channel today. Hey, in this video, I'm going to do an overview of the top 5 reasons of why the single plane swing is easier than the conventional swing that you've been possibly using. And then in each video in this series and the follow-up, I'm going to go through in detail of each one. So the first thing that we got to talk about, why the single plane swing is easier. Now, let me get into a little explanation of this. Everybody's claiming that they have an easier swing, yet nobody's backing it up with any data. So I don't like to do that. So what I'm going to do in a lot of what I talk about, and by the way, I've done this for the last 10 years in my research, is I put some data behind what I discuss. And what I mean by that is some percentages. I give you some, I actually have an entire model I've built on the single plane swing of exactly how much your body should move for the ideal perfect movement. But in doing that, in looking at amounts of movement and studying those things, what I did is I compared that to the conventional swing. So it wasn't me just saying, hey, this is a single plane swing. It said, this is the data compared to a conventional swing. Now you might want to ask, well, where did the data of the conventional swing come from? Well, there's a guy named Dr. Rob Neal, who I really respect and admire in the industry. And Dr. Rob Neal has a company called Golf Biodynamics. Golf Biodynamics has taken data of thousands of golfers, and he compiled this, what he calls a composite of what the average best players do from a metric standpoint, body movement standpoint. Now that's great, because what that allowed me to do was say, hey, here's a single plane swing, and I can compare this data to a conventional model data. Conventional model being, these are the best conventional golfers in the world, here's their metrics and the single plane metrics. And it was actually probably some of the best work I've done, because it revealed why the single plane swing is easier. Let's talk about the first reason. The first reason is simply just the moment of impact. Getting to impact in the easiest possible way, because this must be the definition of simplicity. And you got to follow me on this. The definition of simplicity must revolve around what's the easiest way to get to impact. Impact being this most important moment where the club strikes the golf ball, right? This moment where the club comes down and impacts the ball, hits the face, and the ball spins off the face with backspin and flies straight. Now, there's an element to this that you have to consider. It's not only what's the easiest way to get to impact, which is very important, but what's the most consistent way? Can I do it over and over and over again? You know as well as I do that if you hit one good shot, that's great, but you want to be able to repeat it over and over again. And better yet, your bad shots must be good, right? You have to have a swing where your bad shots. And that again means getting to this moment of impact in a very consistent way. So how does the single plane swing do that? Well, you've seen me do this before, but I'll just kind of go through it again. A conventional golf swing does this. A conventional golf swing has you set up and hang your arms straight down. Now here's my question for you. If you're one of those guys that does that, the question is, why? And I'm not asking because other players do it. Let's forget about that for a second, because what you see on the PGA Tour is variations of how far. I saw a guy in the British Open today with his arms almost perfectly in a single plane. So they have variations. Some guys are here, some guys are here, some guys are here, some guys are here. You have a lot of variations. Okay. The question we have to stop asking the question, what are all these guys doing out there versus what's the easiest way to get the job done? What's the easiest way to get to impact? And so instead of this, instead of hanging your arm straight down, let's consider something. Let's look at impact first. And you notice that great ball strikers get to impact and they look like this. Now they may have their foot up or foot down, but they look like this. The club is lining up with the arms and the shaft is going through the middle of the body. So no matter where they start here, they all end up pretty much in the same place. So wouldn't it be smart to ask a different question? The question being, well, how do we get to this most important moment consistently? Well, the single plane swing solves that. It places the club at address on the same plane as impact. In other words, it starts and impacts on the same plane. Now, how does that simplify the swing? Well, here's what it does. And this is what we're going to do in this entire video series, is we're going to go through how that's not even a concept, that simple biomechanical change of putting the club on the impact plane, starting here and impacting here, how is that simplifying the swing? And each one of these elements that I talk about, the next 4 elements, are going to discuss this and how that simple biomechanical change of placing the club on the same plane as impact makes everything in golf easier. Now here's rule number 2, which is the second reason why the single plane swing is easier, based on what we just talked about, starting and impacting on the single plane. And it has to do with less moving parts. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, less moving parts. We have the same moving parts as any swing. In a single plane swing, we move the same body parts as a conventional swing. The difference is we move those parts less. I'll give you a quick example, a very simple example. When you, and we'll go through more of this in detail, when you set up in a conventional swing and the arms are hanging straight down, that's not where you're going to impact. The shaft's going to lift, the body has to lift. So in other words, if you start here, the body has to lift, the feet have to lift, the spine has to go up. And so what you have is you have a number of things that must be happening during the movement, moving parts, to achieve what we talked about in the first segment, which is impact. Now, by setting up on a single plane, I'll go back to that reference model of the single plane. By setting up where we impact, the question becomes, how did I do that? How did I set up that way to eliminate some moving parts? The first thing we eliminate is the rotation of the hands. And we've eliminated the lifting of the body. So we eliminate these things by the setup position. I just want to make that very clear. Now, here's one thing that's critically important with the single plane swing is tilt. Body tilt. Now, why do I say body tilt that way? Well, because there's 2 tilts. There's a forward tilt and there's a what we call side bend tilt. Now, I'll give you a little bit of statistics here. The average conventional golfer starts between 0 and 10 degrees. So, in other words, if I was facing you, you would see that the average conventional golfer is standing pretty much straight up and down, maybe with a slight side bend. Now, here's where it gets interesting. By the time he accomplishes impact, by the time all good players accomplish impact, they're at approximately 25 degrees of side bend. So you've gone from 0, somewhere in 0 to 6 probably, to 25. So there's 19 degrees of additional side bend of the body that must occur. So here again, let me explain that. So if you start here at between 0 and 6 degrees, and you impact here, see how your body's had to increase the amount of side bend to get to impact? The average conventional golfer has 19 degrees of additional need for side bend. Let me show you single plane. Single plane, because we start, and this is part of getting the proper address. You know how I mentioned, how do I get the proper address position? The single plane golfer starts with already into side bend at 16 degrees. So I'm starting at 16, which means by the time I've made impact, I only added another 9 or so degrees of additional tilt to the body. So instead of adding 19 degrees, I've added 5 to 10 degrees, right, of impact. So that's another reason why the single plane swing is easier, is I have less movement from address, I'm already in the side bend, to impact, versus standing straight up and having to make all this movement, which sometimes turns into a reverse C in the conventional swing. Now let's talk about number 3, how the single plane swing has less stress on the back. Now listen, all these things are related when I talk about how the single plane swing is easier, but this is a big one because stress on the back is a big deal when it comes to helping you have fun playing golf and get better. I would say that half of the students that come to our golf schools have back issues. And I hate to hear that because some of those back issues are caused from golf and some of them aren't, but we want to make it as easy on the back as we can. And the single plane swing does that. Let me show you how it does that. Think about this for a minute. When you're a conventional golfer and you're hanging your arms straight down, you end up in a basically arms hanging straight down, tilted forward position. But in essence, you're too close to the ball. In other words, by the time you've made impact, and we talked about this earlier, the shaft has to actually make a lift, it has to lift. So you're actually lifting the arms as you go into the downswing. So you're creating space. In other words, if you start here, you've got to make room, for the club to get in line with the arms, because there's mass swinging around the body, and the mass is going to try to line up with what's moving at the arms. But here's the problem. You're too close to it. And I call this the one mistake. So what happens is you're actually having to move up as you're swinging down. So you got part of the effort going down and part of the effort going up, and you're rotating. So think what's happening to your body. This part's going down, this part's going up, and you got rotation. So when you have this top part going down, bottom part moving up, you get compression. And then when you're rotating, you get shear. So you got compression and shear, and this is why you have trouble with your back with a conventional swing. So the single plane swing solves that. And the way it does that is you no longer have a downward moving and upward moving portion. You only have a downward moving portion. In other words, you're only going one direction down. As a matter of fact, and we'll talk about this later, the average conventional swing, I'm going to give you some data. The spine, the lower part of the spine, moves up approximately 3 inches. So if you measure somebody's pelvis position, the conventional swing is moving it up 3 inches while the upper body is going down. So if somebody says keep your head still, right? That's what's taught. I don't agree with that. But when they say keep your head still, so you're trying to keep your head still and your pelvis going up, and you've seen that many times, how that can be compression, right? Where the head's trying to stay still, but your body's moving up. Compression. So the average conventional golfer has 3 inches of upward pelvis movement as the head is staying still or moving down. In the single plane swing, our pelvis moves down. Why does it move down? A very simple thing is we hit into a flex knee. That moves the pelvis down. So we no longer, I call it equidistant movement. We're moving the upper body down equally with the pelvis. So now we only have a downward movement. See that? This part of the leg's important because it takes the stability, and now you take stress off your back. Now the fourth reason the single plane swing is easier is because of less rotation. Now, I'm not saying less body rotation. A lot of people think, well, there's less rotation, you don't swing it as fast. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about rotation of the arms and hands. I'm talking about the rotation of this guy, the face. And wouldn't you agree that if we can rotate this less, we can be more consistent? And I'm not saying necessarily rotate the face less, I'm saying rotate what's moving the face less, right? And here's how the single plane swing does it. And again, I've got to go back to a couple of things because no one of these elements is independent. The single plane swing is a system. It's a system of parts. In other words, the position of my body matches the position of my arms. And you see me talk about this stuff quite a bit when I instruct, is that people ask me about, well, tell me about the single plane grip. And I'm like, well, I can't really tell you about the single plane grip because it relates to the position of the body. And the position of the body relates to the arms, and the arms relates to the hands, and the hands relates to the club. So here's how the single plane swing is easier. Because of the tilt, remember the tilt I talked about earlier in this segment? When I tilt this direction, notice that it allows my lead arm to be put into an isolated position where it neutralizes the hand. So now the hand is square with the face. So I've maximized this rotation into a neutral position, which means now I can maximize that rotation into impact. So it eliminates any need to manipulate this hand's rotation. It simply already starts at a maximum position, goes back, and returns back to that maximum position. So this is actually the most efficient, that's a word I like to use, efficient way to move the lead hand. Now here's where it gets really interesting, trail hand. Because again of the tilt, notice the trail hand position is rotated. Because of my tilt, it goes under the club. This is a non-rotational position now. Let me give you a little bit of data again. The average conventional golfer, because of this address position where he hands the arm straight down, this hand is on top of the golf club. It's not necessarily rotated on top. His whole right side is rotated on top. So the hand, the arm, and the shoulder, because of the tilt, are on top of the club. The average conventional golfer, based on the data, shows 13 degrees of right side rotation before he comes to impact. 13 degrees. I'm going to show you a way to have 0 degrees. If I tilt the body correctly at address with a single plane swing, this hand is naturally under the club, and now I can take it back and bring it back down, and I have 0 degrees of trail hand rotation. That's a very important part of how the single plane swing is easier than a conventional swing. And now let me cover the 5th reason, which is lift, shaft lift, which relates to pelvis lift when it comes to how the single plane swing is easier than a conventional swing, and it has to do with that thing we talked about earlier, which is lift. Now, when you look at a conventional swing, you see the shaft is setting down on a lower plane than impact. So it starts here, impacts here, that's too low. Starts here, impacts here. Starts here, impacts here. So you have what we call shaft lift. If you were to measure that in biomechanics, you'd measure the starting point of the shaft and then the impacting point of the shaft, 2 different places. But think about it for a minute. If that means that my body has to also lift. So if I have to lift the shaft, I got to lift my arms, the hands, and the club. And you're adding, by the way, you're adding side bend to that, the stuff we talked about earlier. So, and you're moving the pelvis up as you're going down. This is where it all kind of comes together, that whole shaft lift thing, where you now, because you're not starting on the impact plane, everything has to lower and then raise up into impact, which means you got to make this movement. While you're trying to swing the club in the direction of the target, your body has to make this upward movement. So let's go back through this because it'll highlight the very first thing we talked about was starting and impacting on the same plane. So instead of starting where the conventional swing starts and then swinging to a lifted position, I now can start and impact on the exact same plane, and the shaft will not lift. It'll end up impacting on the exact same shaft plane. And we'll look at that swing because you'll see it start and impact exactly on the same shaft plane. So no shaft lift, which means no body lift, no pelvis lift, less stress on the back, and all that stuff works because it makes impact easier. And that's how the single plane swing in those 5 very simple points is easier than the conventional swing. Hey, if you're enjoying this content, give me a thumbs up, hit the bell icon, subscribe to my channel. In the next series, I'm going to keep going through these parts in more detail. I believe that the single plane golf swing will simplify the golf game for a majority of golfers that play the game of golf. That means that more golfers are having fun playing golf. That's my mission. What I want to accomplish with that mission is I want every golfer that plays the game to, number 1, know who Mo Norman is, know that there's a single plane swing out there in the world. So I want every golfer in the world to know about this guy named Mo Norman and about an easier swing that exists out there. And the reason I want that is because there will be a day, that conventional golfer where he is right now, that one day he will get frustrated with his swing. He'll get to the point of wanting to quit because the conventional golf swing is that hard. And whether it's now when he's 25 years old or when he's 65 years old, he's going to want to quit the game because he just can't do it anymore. And that's the day he's going to call Graves Golf and learn the single plane swing. I just want to make sure that everybody knows who Mo Norman is and that there's an easier way to play.